So thank you everyone for joining. This is a webinar that we're going to do. The topic of it is From Idea to Impact, How Software Modernization Enables Product Innovation. My name's Tim. I'm going to be facilitating this event for you. I don't want to talk too much, but I just wanted to frame the event a little bit for you before we started. So we're going to be hosting a fireside chat between Carl, Sandro and Mash. Proper intros will come. But first, I'm going to explain how this is all going to roll out. So at the start, the first sort of 10 minutes, we're going to be setting the scene for you. This will be a very short presentation just to set the context for everyone. Then we're going to be hosting a facilitated chat between these three guys for the next 40 minutes or so, depending on that. What you all need to know, there is a Q&A feature. Please, any questions you have, pop them in there at any time. We're going to try and get through as many of them as possible. Please try not to post them in the chat. I'm not going to be looking at that, but I do have some little elves in the background who are going to be posting it in Q&A. We're going to try and get through all questions. I also have a few pre-prepared questions to get us nicely warmed up. I'm going to be moderating, asking the questions, hopefully keeping these three in check through it. Yeah, just a quick note, this event is being recorded. So all attendees' mics and cameras should be locked as off in order to avoid any video call faux pas everywhere. So on that, let me reshare my screen. I'd like to introduce our three speakers that we've got this evening. So Carl Horak is the Managing Director of Novoda. Novoda is a digital product agency specializing in mobile and product innovation. I'd also like to welcome Mash and Sandro, the co-founders of Codurance, software consultancy and software, and they're specializing in software modernization. It's one of their key offerings. So what are we going to be talking about today? From idea to impact, how software modernization enables product innovation. What do we mean by that? There's some buzzwords in that title. So Mash, could you explain first, what do we mean with software modernization?
Thank you, Tim. Good evening, everybody. So software modernization, as Tim said, is one of the services that we offer. It's all about making improvements to your strategic systems so that the change is easier. And it's not about any change, but it's about aligning business and technology so that the change, we are making the right kind of changes, that the changes that we are delivering, the effort that we are spending is creating business value.
I can take this from here. For what do we mean with product innovation, or just generally innovation? The simplest way to explain innovation is the ability for an organization to create and improve a service or a product. And in this webinar is going to be digital product, but doesn't have to. And usually it's in response to several things. It could be in response to a market change, a consumer behavior change, or staying ahead of the curve against against your competition. So being innovative is the ability to create or just improve a product that you have within your portfolio.
Great, thank you very much, Carl. So next, what we wanted to do, everyone here, was sort of set the scene or look at two scenarios that we could think of where idea to impact is really slowed down. So when the business has an idea, how long does it take to impact the user? And here are two examples we're going to quickly run through, or two scenarios that should help frame that or put into a context of what we mean by that concept. So Carl, could you take us through this idea?
Thank you, Tim. So again, like to put this into context, I mean, Novoda build digital product. We specialize usually in the front end, the mobile front end. So we build mobile front end that are consumer centric. And when we talk about idea to impact, when you think about it, is how do you go from something that is in someone's head, being a board or consumer change, like that idea, materialize it into a product that then yields some business value. Okay, so in order to be innovative and improve in that type of behavior, if you go to the oversimplistic way, you could look at something like an innovation lab. Okay, so we've seen in some in many cases where an organization try to be more innovative and they lack the capabilities in-house because of either the tech capabilities or the organizational structure of that company is too slow. They create an entity outside of the business in which they intend to be a place in which you generate ideas and hopefully that those ideas becomes product. Okay, and one of the intention of those innovation lab tends to be consumer-centric in design. And what I mean with consumer-centric, that is looking at consumer behavior, doing some consumer research, applying those consumer research, and so forth. And when I say design-led, it's creating the attractiveness within the product, so consumer can identify with those new products. What we've seen is that those labs tend to be fairly, they don't have a clear defined purpose, and they are fairly isolated from the main business for some obvious reasons. But unfortunately, what happens is there is a lot of innovation, a lot of ideas that are generated mainly due to a consumer-centric thinking that is like asking consumer what they want, and that generates a lot of new thinking. But as soon as those ideas need to be built back into the main products of that business, that's when we see some tension and difficulties. And there's a reality that up to 90% of labs just false. And so you have this tension between the high-performing, innovative, entrepreneurial skills of the innovation lab that goes against the more bureaucratic, stagnating tech stack of the business as usual operation from that specific organization. And so this is like on one hand, or like one end of the spectrum, when we have this kind of highly innovative, consumer-led thinking, and then Mash will introduce, let's say, the complete other end of the problem that we want to discuss in this webinar, which is the transformation at the back end. So back to you, Mash.
Thanks, Carl. So yeah, as you said, at the other end, we have this digital transformation on the back end. There's a lot of work happening on the back end, but little attention to the whole. So we kind of get obsessed with fixing the kind of engineering challenge that we have without really understanding what kind of benefit that is driving. I've kind of listed a few anti-patterns that we have. And the first one is kind of the cart before the horse, right? We often get these transformations that are API driven, like since AWS had their success in kind of API marketplaces, we start this massive exercise in building APIs first, but never really understanding what are those APIs for, right? We think that they will be consumed as long as we build them in a generic enough way that we will have this industry of innovative front-end applications using it, but we never actually think about exactly what those front-end applications are. And also, now there is this whole idea of a multi-channel approach. In itself is a very good one, but we end up thinking of it as smart hubs. So I don't know if you've heard of this idea of a smart hub, which effectively is there to integrate everything in the back end, all the kind of ERP solutions and e-commerce and everything else. But again, it's doing the same thing. It's not really looking at the business, what value we need to deliver by and when. It's just kind of preparing for all types of eventualities and getting engaged in this massive engineering exercises in the back end again, without really any value. And sometimes these things go on for years without giving you any value. And the other set of anti-patterns are around wishful reorganization. So we kind of start thinking, okay, you know what, all the teams are talking to each other, there's too much coordination needed, and let's create autonomous teams. But meanwhile, the software didn't get the memo, right? So you got all these teams completely reorganized, but now they're making it even worse for them, because now they have to talk a lot more across boundaries because the systems are not autonomous, right? And in a similar way, I've seen transformations where they've tried to divide the kind of the front end and the front end for back ends from what they would call the kind of the more engineering side of things. And again, so that they could move faster in the front end. But this rarely works because actually you're always going to need both, and you need to think in a more holistic way. And the other thing is the kind of what I call the right solutions, wrong problem, right? So, you know, the whole monolith to microservices. Microservices have a lot of benefits in a lot of cases, but where are you making those changes? You know, you start looking at a lot of this effort that's happening in taking a monolith towards a microservices-based approach. But what's the advantage? What is the next change that that is gonna make better? You know, and then when, right? And similarly, you've got these kind of cloud migration initiatives, right? Everyone's doing it. We all need to go to the cloud because it's gonna be cheaper and better and so on and so on. But again, you know, to what end, right? If you don't actually consider the business, the value that you need to provide, the change that needs to happen next, the cost saving that you need to make in a particular way, then these are kind of exercises in futility, and you will end up doing this massive transformation in the back end that at some point would run out of steam.
Great, thanks very much, Mash. So here we go. We've got these two scenarios. We've got this sort of innovation on one end that comes up with lots of good ideas, but isn't really impactful on the end users. At the same time, we have a very expensive and very big digital transformation on the back end that isn't potentially considering where the business wants to be going with transformation on the technology, but the business isn't aligned. So how do we get this middle ground? How do we understand what a good scenario is? Hopefully, we're going to discuss that in this fireside chat. But I wanted to start the conversation off to a certain extent with looking at the first sort of question, which is like, what stops your ability to create an innovative product? And I'm posing this one because this is one of the questions that we asked the attendees as they signed up for the webinar. And these are some of the answers that they gave us. So legacy code, people, jumping to solutions without spending enough time on the problem you're trying to solve, fear of getting it wrong or losing money, inability to read, judge market, trends of demand correctly, personal skills, communication, how to communicate that to the team, being alone, relentless focus of a rolling 12-month sales cycle and complex, outdated. Now, Sandro, I'm going to go to you first, and I'm going to sort of push that together with this question as well. But for you, what stops your ability to create an innovative product, and how can you sort of comment on these as well at the same time?
Yeah, well, as you can see from all those bullet points, there are a billion reasons to stop companies to produce innovative products. There are very common ones. Some of the attendees, like they were spot on in some of the reasons, because there is the classical time and money. There is the classical, like, we've been burned by that before. We tried that, it didn't work, and now no one wants to hear about it. There is another one that, in that slide, they had a very good one as well. Oh, yeah, so basically you struggle to convince the business, or like you are alone and you also struggle to convince. So we need to detach, well, to talk about them individually, because otherwise I could talk about that for a very long time. So I don't know, is there anyone has a preference, like Mash and Carl, for which one we take? Because I can start picking one first.
I think there is one often thing that is like, you know, convincing the business is quite a key one, especially gets asked by people on the back end, right?
Yeah. So this is very interesting. Okay, let's start with that one, because that one is quite cool. And this is very cool, Mash, because like this is right. Normally, when we say people saying, "Oh, we cannot convince the business," quite often it's coming from back end. I believe that in the front end, Carl may give a different perspective, but normally the transformations from the front is normally more product-centric, is coming normally from the business. Someone has a business idea, but they might struggle to get the funding, right? On the back end is even worse, because sometimes in the back end, they are trying to transform but from a technology perspective. They want to go microservices. They want to go to the cloud. They are looking at technical issues that they are struggling with, or that is really slowing them down. And they want a justification in order to remove those constraints, that frustration that they have on a daily basis. But what happens often is, and I will include myself because I like to think that I'm still a developer by heart, we struggle to connect the technology innovations or modernizing the technology with business goals. So I think that this is, it's funny because this is not that difficult to solve.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually like, if you are able to bring everyone together, well, the relevant group of people to the same room for a few days, you actually probably can get that agreement. The problem is that not always you can get those people, and you struggle to use the right arguments.
Yeah.
But I'll leave like to Carl and Mash to add, because I can go on forever on that topic, but I'd like to see your views on that.
Thank you, Sandro. I think what I enjoy with this discussion, I mean, like we always come on one end, you know, like in a project, and we always, or not always, we're sometimes and fairly often blocked by difficulties in the back end, or like any new features that we are asking takes 6 months to implement somewhere, and as such we drop it. But so I think like you have a point there, which is like all the discipline needs to come together, you know, and like they need to agree. I mean, we've seen this as well in the front end. We worked once with a sizable publishing company that has an estate of maybe like 20 different products, okay, doing the same thing, which is publishing. And they kept on reinventing the wheel. And I remember we were tasked to do a code review or a assessment of a kind of SDK tooling that they intended to use in order to say, okay, you know, we have all those different solutions, all the different products. Let's stop that and create this SDK that had like UI elements to it as well. And then you can just white label this thing so we can like push it against all those different products. And this was built by technology. So it was a very technological driven, you know, well-designed solution that had like all the kind of like engineering thinking behind it, but very little product thinking, you know, and so it stagnated. And then at the end, like the biggest problem here was not the engineering. The problem was you have different teams that don't talk to each other. You know, like ultimately it's like if you put people together, and instead of organizing yourself around the estates and around the actual feature itself, let's say profile or fetching an article, you might be able to then find a solution here. But because it's much easier to organize yourself around, you know, business lines that are simply to comprehend from a product perspective, from a business perspective, that is, you know, like this brand has this product and this brand has this product, it makes it difficult to come up with common solutions between the different products. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot in there in which like organization, like how the organization is structured, and making sure that, you know, like team talk to each other. That's probably one of the first thing to any type of innovative thinking anyway, generally, because I mean, I'm a believer in kind of lateral thinking. If you go out of your secure space on what you do, you tend to have like more interesting ideas that then lead to something new. Yeah, maybe
on that, Carl, you talk about, you know, getting teams to talk to each other. It's not always the easiest thing. So I'm going to get to Mash and ask, you know, that, and what are the other cultural barriers perhaps that stop that from happening?
You're reading my mind, really, because I was thinking about like it's easier said than done, and like huge cultural issues, right?
Everyone should just talk to each other. Easy.
It's easy, but you know, it's like, especially if you think about mobile that came later, right? In most organizations often started with some sort of a, you know, digital offering, and they started building systems. And even started before that in supply chain, right? And then went to e-commerce, but the mobile came later, and the way they've often done this is by okay, we're going to keep that organization there, and we're going to create a new mobile organization. In most companies, actually, you've got engineers sitting in one place, you've got, front-end developers sitting in another, mobile developers sitting in another, business product owner sitting somewhere else. And it creates these huge cultural barriers, right? And in fact, it's not even sometimes acceptable for, let's say, a meager backend developer to go to speak to a UX person, or, the mobile and backend kind of talking to each other around a particular thing. And often they are discouraged because actually you've got product owners or engineering managers kind of beating the whip on the back end, and same happens in the front end. And like the front end guy or mobile guy comes to you and say, I really need this particular feature in the back end to kind of get this done. And saying like, now talk to the product owner because I'm too busy doing this. And this kind of happens all the time. So even when there is a kind of the culture, you kind of bypass the cultural pressure and you kind of seek help. You kind of go across the divide, the many divides that exist. The way that your work is structured and the way your management is looking at you, it makes it almost impossible. And our job often is actually easier in that sense, is that, when we come in, there's like, the consultants are coming in, so we have to give them some time. And you kind of say, we need this, and these people. And it's almost unfair that it's easier for us to be able to put those people together, but not themselves,
That's an interesting point, because one of the biggest impact we've seen is by bringing engineer to a user testing setup, or even to prove something to the businesses. Especially in COVID era, we've done some user testing remotely. You film it and then you just present it back, saying, "This is how your consumer understand your product," and the impact of that is tremendous. Especially when including like when you involve engineers, because suddenly there's a reality of what you're building has an impact on somebody's life, and so I think like that. Again, like looking at it from product definition or like ideation at the product level, and then having that implemented all the way in which it has a business impact takes time and is messy. It's really messy. We try to measure it many times. It's very messy to measure because there's so many departments, there's so many different things, then it gets blocked somewhere and so forth. So like having that diligence to focus on that is complex. But if you do it well, if you manage to have different teams talking together and coming together to solve a problem, that tends to have a tremendous effect, a really, really nice effect on how quickly you can deliver, but also how innovative and autonomous teams are to deliver at speed.
There are quite a few things you said that we can discuss as well. So, for example, one thing you mentioned was measuring, right? So we want to measure the innovations or the things that we are pushing out, and it is extremely important to explain that in order to have continuous innovation, you need to have an architecture or a group of systems that are flexible and robust at the same time. And this balance, they need to be flexible because you are constantly changing and experimenting, but they need to be robust because you are pushing those things out and people are using that. So, and achieving that flexibility versus robustness is extremely hard, but it's also not a single measure either, because, for example, we also need to understand what kind of innovation we are pushing out. So some companies, they are more on the lean startup approach, for example. They don't know necessarily what their customers want. They have a hunch. They have like, look, I think that this is a very innovative product. There's not a lot competitors in the market. So they are not only building a new feature, they are creating a market, they are creating a new product. So in those cases, it's very difficult to do user research or to be very specific in your user research, which means that you go for a lean startup, what it is, push it out, collect information, inspect and adapt. So you push out, Then you see what people think, and then you adapt. But in order to do that, you have that very fast feedback and collect the and measure, as you were saying, Cole, you need to design your systems to enable that, which is slightly different when, for example, one of our clients, they are B2B, although their systems are used by consumers, but it's sold to other business and then used by other. So, but they have like thousands of B2B clients. So when they are innovating, they have a very good amount of customers, solid customers at all levels, very big customers or smaller customers, to do a very customer research and understand what the customers want and stuff. So when they innovate and they release a feature, it needs to be far more stable, far more robust. There is less interest. There is far more emphasis on customer research, and then but the architecture also needs to support that. So the point I'm trying to make is that the way that you design your systems in order to collect those metrics and stuff, it matters, and also understanding what kind of let's say type of innovation the business is trying to do, and how and what's the size of the feedback loop that they want.
It's interesting to kind of think. I mean, it's like anything really. You're trying to build for change. In fact, I would say that one of the key requirements of any system is that it will make the next bits of change easy, right? But you can't make like this flexible and robustness is actually speaks of rigidity in certain dimensions and openness or flexibility in other dimensions, right? And in order to understand where you need to make the thing flexible, where you need to make it rigid, it's like I often talk about this grain. In the wood you have this grain, and the wood is actually weaker across the grain and stronger along the grain. And it's because a tree stands in a particular way and it has certain forces acting on it. And those are forces of change, right? And software is no different, whether it's in front end and back end, is that you need to understand where those forces are coming from. Where do I need to make it strong and robust? And where do I need to make it flexible and easy to change, right? Because you can't make it easy to change everywhere. That's over engineering, of course, and you can't make it completely rigid, because then you won't be able to change anything.
I think that leads into a question that we've had in the Q&A, which is around how do you convince a company or an organization that an innovation that is helpful for development on the mobile part, for example, but it doesn't give direct and immediate benefit to the business. And that's an idea of like flexibility or being rigid. I don't know whether, Mash, you want to follow up on that. Like, how do you go about convincing that so that, an innovation that is helpful for development on mobile for part, for example, that doesn't have direct immediate benefit to the business?
So there are this is a difficult one. And I think we can start talking about these proxy performance indicators, and we talk about 4 key metrics as well, and I'll describe that in a bit. But it is difficult, and I think you should always actually make it from the point of view of the business. If you are struggling to do that, you should ask yourself that question: why am I struggling to present this thing, this improvement, from the value perspective? Why can I not convince other stakeholders, right? And it's normally because it can only be 2 things. Either you're not articulating it in a way that is valuable to the people making the decision, or you got it wrong. So in order to do that, you have to, sorry, Sandro, you're gonna.
No, please finish, Mash. I would like to.
I was just saying, so it's a good exercise actually to go ahead and try to convince. And if you can't convince, you should look back on yourself. It's like, which one is it? Have I not found the right way of expressing it, or have I made the wrong assumption?
Yeah, what I would like to say is that this is a false dichotomy. This is like, it's fascinating. When we are working, like, we end up specializing ourselves, like, over the years in software modernization. And software modernization, quite often, is about modernizing the technology stack, the architecture and stuff. And one of the biggest challenges we had was, what is the value? Right. So, and this is the thing. I think the false dichotomy is to think that value to the business is only a new feature. right? So that we only produce value if we are enhancing the product. But that's not true. So for example, what we can talk about is inefficiencies. Let's say that we take a very long time to release any feature to production, or the QA cycle is very long, or there is a very bad performance, or for example, the mobile team is waiting for God knows how many months for the back-end people to be free so that they have time to build something for them. So all of those are inefficiencies. So all of those inefficiencies have business value. By the cost of delay, or for example, multiple teams changing the same pieces of code and not being able to release independently because they need to have a code freeze and test the entire system, right? So
let's dig into that a bit more then. Around like common like pitfalls or red flags we can spot from both, I guess, from a product innovation side or the more for back end side. What can you spot that's a big red flag that knows people are going down the wrong route?
Can I just answer on Sandro's point quickly, just before we jump into the red flags? Because I found it quite fascinating. Obviously, Sandro and Mash probably answer more at the kind of transformation aspect, you know? And I'm trying to just like rethink it, you know, the question itself, which is convincing about innovation that might be helpful on one part, but is not, you know, for the business. I agree that this question is structured in a way in which, like, maybe you have, like, the way, let's say a typical best case picture is usually when a company look at themselves more in a design-led way, as a journey level. You hear the customer experience level, and you look at the journey without considering back in the front end. You know, so it's like you try to improve a journey, being like buying something, and you look at it from the perspective of the user. And so any improvement or any innovation lies with improving on that customer journey, which will then have impact on the business. If there's no impact on the business, on Sandro's point, or was it Mash's point, then you have to really question if there's value in that change itself. You know, like it has, there needs to be a chain of reasoning as to why you're going to spend engineering time building something. If you cannot map it to business value, there's probably a problem somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And there could be millions of reasons to why you're not, because you have a huge organization and so forth. But so what we've seen is the more you focus on the behavior of the user is the simplest way of understanding business value to a degree or another, because it's quite simple. You know, like a consumer behavior tends to be, I mean, complex in the way that they behave, but like that the journey itself is simpler, and then it becomes ugly when you see all the system that it touches and all the teams that it touches and so forth. But you can narrow it down to, you know, improving the time it takes to, let's say, buy something, or the one-click buy or something similar. Like if you retain that focus, there is business value behind it.
I think there is an added element, and I think, Carl, it's 100% that at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is make the value generation for the business easier, right? And that basically means that, you know, whoever the customer of the business is, you're making their life easier, you're adding more services, you improving the experience. That is for sure 100%. You know, you need to keep concentrating on that. But the other part to that is that what Sandro was mentioning was cost of delay, right? It's like I've got to do, you know, the customer journey needs to get better, and there are these 10 features that need to work in order to make the customer journey better. But actually, I'm gonna deliver them in their entirety in 2 years' time, or I'm going to deliver them in 8 months' time, let's say, right? At what point, you know, is that cost of delay, right? So often what we do is we kind of make this from a back-end perspective, you know, even when we understand that these are the features that need to happen for the business to work, and then we say, well, they're going to take 2 years to do. You know, you get pushback, and of course from yourself and from your team as well. Like, why is it taking 2 years? I mean, you know, if it was a brand new product, it'd be quicker. And you think, well, yeah, that is all this technical debt that exists that is actually causing it. But then what we do is we say to our stakeholders, well, if we do this, it'll be quicker to deliver those features. But we are not willing to put more analysis, more work in place to say how much quicker. And of course, everything is an estimate and so on, and you need to kind of work with feedback. But often we don't even have this feedback loop kind of circled. We say we're going to make this change, and it's going to have this benefit that we're going to, okay, feature one, we're going to deliver maybe a bit later, but feature two will be maybe at the same feature three, maybe actually earlier than before. But we don't actually measure that. So we don't, and I know it's difficult, it's not easy to measure these things, and that's where those kind of some of the proxy metrics like release frequency and change failure rate and so on, they kind of talk about this waste that is, you're reducing. But we need to kind of measure that, and we need to make certain commitments. And of course, they are estimates, and you can talk to your business, say like, we're a team and we're trying to make this better, and this is an experiment. We do this, and this will be quicker in the long term, right? So I think it's both. That's my point, is that you have to look at the customer journey and the features that will help the business work, but also the cost of delay on not building them earlier, right? And that, the two together actually create a good strategy.
Yeah, this is one of the things that we always look at. So if you want to, because we make a distinction, when we talk about software modernization, we normally talk something about more strategic, right? So the modernization is not just a small refactoring that you do here and there, or a bunch of unit tests that you add here and there. So that is just part of your normal day-to-day flow. That is all those minor refactorings and testing and stuff, right? So that's just normal killing or small technical debts at the small. But the modernization normally is more strategic, and that's what Mesh was saying. So there are many different ways of leading that. All the software modernization initiatives are related to somehow some innovations or inefficiencies, right? So normally it's very difficult not to have one of those in mind, because it's difficult to justify. And in terms of the innovation, we had like scenarios where, for example, one company wanted to, let's say they had a big monolith, right? So, and they wanted to make a lot of changes in the UI and in how they have the catalog of products and stuff. But they could not deploy fast enough because the payment system was part of the monolith. And the problem is every time that the monolith is changed, and because the payment system was part of it, it had to be PCI compliant. And in order to be compliant, they had an auditing process internally and stuff. So basically, because of a completely unrelated area of the system, the whole innovation side that should happen in the catalog and product and stuff was blocked. Or they had the other direction as well. They wanted to add payment methods into the system, and that was delaying the release of everything else. So for example, one of the ideas to modernize, we could choose. So in that case in specific, we chose to actually segregate the blocker for deployment, that is the payment. So we just moved the entire payment system out of the monolith into its own service, so that all the rest of the system could be deployed as often as they could, and the payments area would receive more attention, let's say, because the release cadence was different. But we could also have chosen just to extract the product or catalog area, because like this is all dependent on how often. For example, if you want to when you look at the features for the next 6 months, next year or stuff, we analyze how many changes we're going to have in a specific area of the system. Is the architecture designed in a way that area of the business matches the architectural component? Because then we can make the two to match, and then we can localize the change there, the business that they want, the fast feedback, the fast innovation. We can isolate that from the rest of the architecture, and then we constrain the change. We localize the change, and we minimize the ripple effect. So that's how the modernization enables the innovation, or can support the innovation in this case.
I have a question for you on that. I mean, is there any specific, like that part, let's say, that you want to isolate to iterate much quicker on, to be innovative, that is like test new ideas? Have you come across any specific technology? I mean, you had the term backend for frontend, for instance, or GraphQL or similar, which are more front-end, technologies in a way or another. It's like, is there any recommendation of thinking here that one should look for?
I can answer that. I think there are. So, for example, if you look at something like GraphQL, you create something quite generic because you're not sure how the front end is going to use it, right? So GraphQL is effectively a bit slightly more than kind of database as your backend. Of course, it provides a way for you to have the business logic in there, but effectively that's what you're looking. You're saying that present to me the data in a kind of a structured way, and then how I query what I get out of it. I don't want everything and so on. I want flexibility, and it goes back to like, where are you adding flexibility? To me, that often speaks of there is this, like when we say, okay, put GraphQL, because what the front end is saying is, I don't want to have to kind of depend on you over and over again for like, oh, I need this field, but don't need this field, and I need this field, and so on, right? So I think when features are developed as a team, in a cross-functional team, the need for more generic solutions goes away. Generic solutions, on one end, have a advantage, as I described, but they also have a disadvantage because they actually speak of, in certain cases, they speak of over-engineering. You're building a lot of feature sets within that generic kind of feature that may not be needed, right? So, like, in what I'm trying to say is that, if, for example, we are experimenting heavily, and the back end or the way the data needs to be retrieved or the business that needs to sit in the back end is simple enough, of course, it makes sense to do it in a generic way and, kind of get it done. But actually, if every single feature and the feature sets that you're offering in the front end is driving the feature sets in the back end as well, then a generic solution is not the thing, right? Because that would mean that you would have to completely over-engineer something in order to serve all the possible needs that could possibly have as the product evolves.
Right. Yeah, I would like to add also that is, when you are building the backend, we need to understand the different functional areas, or like in domain-driven design, people talk about bounded context, but like we like to talk about functional areas or business areas, because like even if you provide a very flexible way of querying data, you cannot use the same API and try to query all the different types of data that the backend can provide. So the data related to client is different from product, that is different from catalog, that is different from orders, that is different from whatever else. So in the backend, we also need to segregate like which architectural component will own each data. And then also there is the ownership of the flow. So who owns the flow? Normally when you have like the mobile and the web and you want to keep them fairly independent and having their own flow because they can benefit from their native technology. So your backend needs to be quite stateless and agnostic of the flow. They should be able to provide data and be able to execute commands, but the actual user journeys can be tailored in the different delivery mechanisms. That could be the different mobiles and stuff. But then you need to design your backend to provide that flexibility, not only in the amount of data that you want to consume, but also to change your user journey without having a big impact on the backend as well. But it needs to be designed that way. Most legacy systems, by the way, end up having a big chunk of the user journey or the sequence of events codified in the backend, which makes it the mobile integration very difficult.
One of my biggest beef in the exercise of defining this is mobile and browser is fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And so a browser tends to be an active request response approach. You open your browser with the intention of doing something, so checking your bank balance, for instance, you open your bank you know, whatever my bank.co.uk reply is like it's on the spot information. Mobile is passive and is evented, so that is like a publish subscribe thinking. So you know, like the reality is you have sometimes, and this is not the case anymore. When I started mobile, you know, like very bad networks that jumps, so disconnect and connect and so forth. You have push notification capabilities. You tend to like have like the notification bar, you know, like as main point of entry into the brand that you try to represent as a product. And as such, you know, like the more you think about it as a journey in which there's different events that then leads to some user behavior, that's mobile, including stuff like geofencing, for instance. You know, you have the location, you have the fact that you're running or walking, you have et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So on one hand, you have an active request reply approach with the browser, which tends to guide and lead the implementation of the backend. And then on the other side, you have the mobile team that function in a much more publish subscribe methodology in their thinking with push notification and so forth, and then a passive approach in which, you know, the best experience is the one in which it's just transparent and it knows you. The fact that, you know, Monzo is a good example against the, you know, like you pay someone, you receive the notification, you have this kind of ability to know information without necessarily actively asking for it. Okay, and those two models has a very different approach on the data. You know, and so, but it doesn't seem to be taken into account in a lot of the work that we do. Is what happens is we piggyback against what the team has defined with the web, and they say, well, look, it's a front end, it's a web, look how it is, you know, and then we're like, fine, but that's not how mobile works, you know, and the amount of times, and just like for instance APIs, it's much better to do one request on 4G network. 5G network is better, but like have one big request rather than a lot of small requests, you know. And if any web browser is like, okay, just like everything should just fetch left and right, and that's okay because it's all in the browser and it's all like Ajax and so forth. So people still do Ajax. Anyway,
I haven't heard that for a while.
Like it came out of my head. Fine, I look old. But you know, like mobile is like, it's much better to like big downloads, and then you have offline access, for instance, and so forth. So you can use it in the tube. And again, like that thinking usually comes too late. You know, 2 years in after transformation. So like, yay, actually, you know, we need to do this, and this.
That actually goes to a comment that Jack made on the chat along the lines of like mobile coming later. In fact, that often, you know, your organizations have sold adopted the idea of cross-functional teams, and yet they still lessons that they have. Happening, what would indicate that is happening of an style?
I have like a quick one. It's just like, look at your team, cross-functional team. If there's no mobile representation, then there's a problem. And if you have like also the team naming, we had like in cross-functional team called, let's say, user, like let's say finding an apartment team, like Journey, okay, and they were responsible for that. And then suddenly you had something called the app factory. You know, a factory is just, it's like usually, you know, it's a bad code smell in code, and it's the same in organization. It's like you don't know what this is, so you just have this team that is a factory of app of sort because you do not know how to fetch them into like the rest of the organization. So I think, and that's quite telling. So look at the composition of your cross-functional team. You need to have a representation of mobile within that from the get-go, not an afterthought, and not depending on another team that is called the mobile team or the app factory or whatever.
Carl, I actually have a question on that. You know, like there is in mobile, there is always this conflict, right? Because, and the conflict exists in the web as well, is that you've got the features, so you can divide or you can create bounded contexts on different features within the app. But the app itself is very different to in some cases, because it needs to provide a very, and I would argue the web does as well, but more so on the mobile, it needs to provide a very cohesive user experience. So often these two things, so having mobile people kind of aligned to certain parts of the customer journey versus alignment, which is cross-alignment on this cohesive user experience, that conflict needs to be managed somehow, right?
Yes. Yeah, and you're touching a really difficult point. It's the same as deployment. Yeah, deploying an app is complicated because it's aggregation of everything into one binary, and then you are dependent on Apple or Google to like allow it. Okay, and so that's the problem, and trying to solve it is difficult, and I think it is messy generally to involve mobile as part of that. You know, so like what we've seen is, you know, you wear several hats. You see what I mean? It's like, on one hand, you're responsible for one journey, but you're also a Android developer. You see, and so you participate in a lot of the conversation, but you also, you know, you also look at it from just like the platform capability. And what I've seen as well is a separation, let's say, between, let's say, product and platforms. You know, so you try to build the platforms with SDKs and stuff like this, and then the product teams are solely focused on improving a specific journey. And again, you know, if you have, let's say, 10 journeys, that doesn't mean you need to have, let's say, 20 Android engineers and 20 iOS engineers. But the fact that you have the organizational structure implemented like this, even if you have only 6 engineers in mobile, but they can jump and be responsible for several journeys. I think there's a separation here between the organizational structure that needs to map the business value as opposed to the platform capabilities, like, or the technical capabilities. And the more you focus on that, the better it gets. But again, it is messy. You know, engineers tend to prefer the skills that they have and stay within that. And the ones that we've seen work the best is when you ask people to go out of their comfort zone, including like from product perspective or looking at the backend or another language, you know, play a bit with JavaScript if you're a Swift user and stuff like this. And the more days of interaction there, the better it gets. But, you know, it's always a bit messy.
I think we might have just one more question. It's going to be a question from Fran, because I think it's a good finisher. We had several milestones in software modernization, like microservices architecture, DevOps culture, automation. These all enable innovation in the last decade. What do you think is a minimum software environment for innovation today? And what do you think will be the next big thing in software as an enabler for innovation?
Wow.
Might not be a quick answer, but let's give it a go.
Okay, so, no, thanks, Francisco. That was a difficult question. So I'll need to try to tackle parts of it independently. So I think that the microservice and DevOps, they're not necessarily related to software modernization. I think that software modernization is an idea. It's like you need to modernize. That's a continuous process, as Mash was saying, to modernize strategic systems. And you will use a bunch of techniques, practices, processes, or even mindset, like the DevOps kind of culture. You might, in a specific environment, you might use microservices as a pattern, an architectural pattern for your problem. But in terms of the mindset, I think that it was part of the question is gone, I guess. Now, I think if I click on answer, can I still see the question? Yes. Oh yeah. Okay. So So in terms of the mindset that you mentioned in there, I think that we, from a technical side, we still not very business oriented. So I think that we still need to be more business focused. I also think that craftsmanship is still not there yet, so that focus on excellence is not there yet. However, I also had a small criticism to some areas of the craftsmanship where they lost pragmatism as well. So I know I like to say that excellence should exist within the boundaries of pragmatism. So we should search for pragmatic solutions and then have excellence within those solutions. So that is another part of the mindset for me. And I don't know what's the big thing next, right? So, and I believe that patterns and techniques, they will vary from context to context. For example, one of our biggest clients, architecturally speaking, as you mentioned, microservice, we agreed that the best solution for them, they have more than 11,000 production installations. And because of their market, their industry, they cannot have, they need to be multi-instance and not multi-tenant. So in that case, we went for a modular monolith and not a microservice. Microservice will make our production environment chaotic. So, and I just want to finish. I don't know what the next big thing is, but I think that we lost at some point the ability to architect systems well. I think that we threw the baby with the bathwater. Architecture became bad, anti-agile, slow, and we gradually lost that ability to architect. So I think we should pay more attention to architecture again.
Great, thanks, Sandro. And then let's go for quick finishing comments from everyone. What are the key takeaways that you've had from this discussion, starting with Matt?
I think my key takeaway is that, it's messy, but the world is messy. The problems that we work in are messy. And trying to say front-end teams and back-end teams and mobile teams and so on, although creates a nice kind of comfortable little environments for us and comfortable little teams for us, but actually at a system level, that's causing a lot of the problems. So we need to get as messy as our problems are.
Shall I go next? What I find fascinating is, I think, as Sandro and Mash was answering some of the question, you can see how the mindset is geared towards the problem that they are trying to solve generally in the day-to-day of what they do. And I realize the same with me, because I'm thinking more about like the product side or the consumer side and like the behavior and stuff like this, including like on the point of GraphQL, for instance. It's like, I'm the one who says like, why should it take so long? I want to create this, this, and this, only get this information. Why is it so complicated? And I think like the solution is also within this is like more conversation between the different departments, between the different technology structure within an organization. And the more you have that, and including like, by the way, product design and so forth, like the widen your thinking as much as you can. And the more you focus on that, I reckon the more innovative you become as an organization. And I think that's true as well for culture, just personality. You travel, you expand your mind. And I think it's the same here. Like if your organization is wider in their thinking, then you become more innovative.
Yeah, for me, it's along the same lines. As Carl was saying, like we are normally very focused on the technology side of things, on the hardcore architecture and testing and craftsmanship. But we can solve a lot of problems in that front, but we lack sometimes the innovation, the business drive. The people that we deal with not always have that business drive, or they need some help in that business direction, and that would make our job easier. And Carl, from what I understand, is coming from a different direction, which is very difficult to. They have loads of amazing ideas to innovate, but they are blocked by the back end or the technology. And this is one of the biggest interests that, for example, at least from Codurance perspective, we had in speaking to Novoda and try to combine those ideas, because we believe we say like people need to talk, but similar to companies like ours, they also need to talk. Because in this way, we can tackle the problems in a more holistic way.
Awesome. Right. Right. That's, I'm going to call time on it. I want to say thank you very much to Carl, Mash and Sandro. That was really interesting. And thank you all for the attendees that came along and listened. Thank you for the people who asked questions. It made it very enlightening and interesting talk. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you everyone very much for coming along. Thank you Carl, Mash and Sandro. And everyone have a lovely evening on the first night of lockdown.